Amelia, a woman who spent years in the shadows, her life controlled by her husband, James, and his domineering mother, Linda. Her every move was dictated by their rules and expectations, leaving her to question if she would ever find true freedom. But one day, a single moment of defiance changes everything. From escaping an emotionally suffocating life to finding her own path, Amelia embarks on a journey of self-discovery and healing. Along the way, she meets people who remind her of what respect and kindness look like, and she slowly begins to rebuild her life. But the ghosts of her past still linger, and facing them will require a strength she didn't know she had. Will Amelia finally find the courage to break free from her past for good? And what awaits her on the other side of that freedom? If you're as intrigued as we are, stick around to watch Amelia's inspiring transformation. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave a comment below on what you think of her journey. And now, let's dive into Amelia's story. Amelia Carter stood in the middle of her living room, clutching a tray of appetizers and forcing a polite smile as a wave of laughter surged through the crowd. The laughter, she knew, wasn't for her. It was because of her. Her husband, James, had just given her a gift in front of all his friends, an old broom with a sly grin and a teasing tone. "Here's your ride, Amelia," he joked, as though she should be thrilled with the attention. "Thought you might need it to get away from all this." The room erupted in laughter, with guests nodding in agreement. Amelia's cheeks flushed as she met her husband's smug gaze. "Go on," he pressed, voice edged with impatience. "Give it a try." Beneath her polite facade, Amelia's heart ached. This was her birthday party as much as his, only it didn't feel like hers at all. She didn't recognize most of the faces around her, the friends and colleagues James had brought in from his world. His success filled the room, proudly displayed in every smile, every eager laugh. Amelia, though, felt like a stranger in her own home. Turning away from the crowd, she set the tray down and smoothed her dress, crumpled from hours of prepping and serving food. The muscles in her arms ached, and her feet throbbed from rushing up and down to cater to every whim of her husband's friends. Not a single one of them had thanked her, let alone remembered it was her birthday too. As the noise of the party droned on, a voice at a nearby table cut through her thoughts. "Is she really James's wife?" a woman muttered. Her tone was low, but it carried across the room, reaching Amelia like a slap. Amelia's face burned, her hands trembling as she tried to ignore the sinking feeling gnawing at her stomach. She looked toward James, hoping for a small glance of solidarity or kindness, but he was busy entertaining guests, oblivious to her discomfort. Unable to bear the weight of her own humiliation, Amelia grabbed a glass of water to keep her hands busy. But just as she turned to leave the room, the glass slipped from her grip and shattered, spilling across the floor. The laughter cut off abruptly, and the room fell silent, every eye turning her way. Linda, James's mother, was the first to speak. "Can't you do anything right, Amelia?" she sneered, her voice as cutting as glass. Amelia felt her spirit shrink, feeling more like a misfit than ever. Kneeling to clean up the broken glass, she bit her lip to hold back tears, not wanting to give Linda the satisfaction of seeing her cry. Just then, a pair of feet stopped near her, and she looked up, half hoping to see someone offering a hand to help. Instead, it was James, his face twisted in a smug grin. He leaned down, voice low but loud enough for everyone to hear. "You're a mess, Amelia," he said, chuckling under his breath. "But hey, look on the bright side, I already got you a broom." The crowd laughed louder than ever, and in that moment, something inside Amelia shifted. A faint but fierce anger ignited within her, a feeling that had been building for longer than she could remember. Her hand tightened around the broom handle, and she glanced around the room, realizing just how alone she was in this life she'd built with him. This was supposed to be her home, her birthday, her life, and yet she barely recognized any of it or herself. Amelia gripped the broom tightly, her knuckles white as she tried to compose herself. With a quick, forced smile, she swept the shattered glass into a dustpan, listening to the laughter around her fade into murmured conversations. Every passing comment felt like another thorn, pricking her heart as she cleaned up the mess. She looked up and caught James's eye across the room, only to find him shaking his head with mock disappointment, as if she were a child who had failed at a simple task. She lowered her gaze, humiliated. Beneath her rising anger was a familiar numbness, the same feeling she'd carried for years. James's unkind words and Linda's sharp looks were nothing new. She'd endured them for as long as she could remember, brushing aside every slight, every subtle insult, until they built into a quiet storm inside her. As the party wore on, she retreated to the kitchen, needing a moment alone. She leaned against the counter, closing her eyes and breathing deeply, letting the coolness of the granite ground her. She could hear Linda in the living room, still holding court over the guests, her voice sharp and commanding. Linda's words carried a lifetime of criticisms, each one meant to remind Amelia of her place, a place that always felt more like a servant than a daughter-in-law. It was Samantha's voice that brought her back to the present. "Hey, Amelia, are you all right?" Amelia opened her eyes, surprised to see her old friend standing in the doorway, her face etched with concern. Samantha had arrived late, not fully aware of the events of the evening, but perceptive enough to notice Amelia's discomfort. "Oh, Sam," Amelia whispered, the words caught in her throat. "I've fine. Just a little tired." Samantha took a step closer, her eyes softening as she studied Amelia's face. "You know, you don't have to pretend with me." Those words opened a floodgate. Amelia felt the tight grip on her heart loosen slightly, and a single tear slipped down her cheek. She quickly brushed it away, embarrassed to let even Samantha see her vulnerability. "I just thought tonight would be different," she admitted quietly. "But it's always the same. I keep thinking maybe they'll see me, appreciate me. But James, she trailed off, unsure how to put her feelings into words. Samantha's brow furrowed, her hand reaching out to rest on Amelia's shoulder. "You deserve better than this," she said softly. "James has no right to treat you this way. And Linda, don't even get me started on her." Amelia forced a smile. "Thank you, Sam. Really. But it's complicated. I've been in this life for so long. It's all I know." Samantha's expression shifted, a flash of sadness in her eyes. "Maybe it's time to change that." The night ended quietly, the guests filtering out one by one, leaving a trail of crumpled napkins and empty glasses. James, oblivious to Amelia's distress, barely acknowledged her as he walked past, already muttering about the party's success and Linda's plans for their next gathering. "Amelia," Linda called sharply from the doorway, watching as Amelia cleared the last of the dishes. "You're cleaning up, I assume? It's late, and I have an early morning." "Yes, Linda," Amelia replied, her voice steady but hollow. As Linda swept out of the room with her usual air of self-importance, Amelia was left alone in the dimly lit kitchen. She turned back to the dishes, her hands working on autopilot as her mind raced. James's careless remarks echoed in her head, blending with Linda's biting words, each memory piling onto the weight already pressing down on her chest. She paused, looking around the empty room. Was this her life? Serving, cleaning, catering to everyone's needs but her own? Amelia closed her eyes, a faint voice whispering inside her, barely audible, yet unmistakable. It was the voice of a younger Amelia, a version of herself she hadn't allowed herself to think of in years, a woman who had once dreamed of more, of freedom and joy and respect. That night, as she lay alone in bed, she thought of Samantha's words. Maybe it's time to change. The thought clung to her, comforting yet unsettling. Could she really consider a different life? She felt guilty for even imagining it. The thought of leaving James and Linda almost unthinkable. But the idea lingered, weaving its way into her dreams, fueling a tiny spark of hope she'd long buried. The following day dawned bright and clear, but a storm was brewing within Amelia. As she went about her chores, her mind kept returning to the events of the night before. Each reminder of James's cruelty and Linda's disdain added fuel to the quiet fire in her chest. By late afternoon, the silence in the house felt suffocating. She found herself in the living room, dusting a shelf when James walked in, glancing at her with the same detached indifference he always had. "Amelia," he said, his tone dismissive. Linda wants you to stop by her place tomorrow. She says there's a lot that needs doing before her bridge club meets. Amelia froze, her fingers gripping the dust cloth as she stared at him, the words piling up in her throat, ready to burst. "James," she said, her voice unsteady but firm. "Don't you think it's enough? Last night, you embarrassed me. You humiliated me in front of everyone." James looked at her, surprised by her defiance. "Amelia, you're overreacting. It was a joke. Lighten up." "It wasn't a joke to me," she replied, her voice trembling but gaining strength. "I deserve more than this. More than being treated like your servant." He scoffed, rolling his eyes. "Maybe if you didn't take everything so personally, you wouldn't feel that way." A surge of frustration boiled up in Amelia, her hands clenched at her sides. "You don't get it, do you?" she said quietly, her voice a mixture of sadness and resolve. "I've spent years trying to make you and your family happy, but it's never enough, and I'm done trying." The room fell silent, the weight of her words sinking in. For the first time, Amelia saw a flicker of something in James's expression, perhaps surprise, perhaps irritation. But he didn't respond. Instead, he turned and walked away, leaving her alone with her thoughts, a quiet resolve settling over her. As Amelia looked around the empty house, she felt a strange sense of peace. She wasn't sure what her next steps would be, but one thing was certain: something had changed. She would no longer be invisible, no longer a shadow in her own life. Amelia spent the next few days in a state of quiet rebellion, holding back from her usual attempts to placate James and Linda. Each time Linda made a snide remark, Amelia met her gaze, saying nothing but allowing her silence to speak. And every time James brushed her off with his usual condescension, she held back her usual polite responses, letting him see a quiet strength she hadn't dared show before. An unexpected opportunity for change arrived on the weekend, when Linda announced she was hosting another gathering at her home. Linda's tone was as direct as ever, demanding Amelia's help without even a hint of appreciation. "This isn't a request, Amelia," Linda had said over the phone, her voice laced with disdain. "I expect you to be here early to set everything up. This is important to me." Amelia took a deep breath, her stomach twisting at the thought of facing another night like her birthday. But then she remembered the small but powerful revelation she'd had. She would no longer be invisible. She owed herself that much. On the day of the gathering, Amelia showed up to Linda's house, though later than usual. She walked in with her shoulders squared, determined to stay out of the way, to blend in as much as possible until she could slip away. Linda was waiting in the kitchen, frowning the second she laid eyes on Amelia. "You're late," she snapped, as though Amelia had committed a crime. Amelia kept her gaze steady, resisting the urge to apologize. Instead, she simply nodded, saying nothing. Linda stared at her for a moment, clearly taken aback by the change in Amelia's demeanor. But she didn't say anything, turning back to the spread of food and drinks she was arranging. Throughout the evening, Amelia moved quietly around the room, serving drinks, refilling platters, and doing her best to avoid Linda's icy gaze. She could feel the weight of judgment in every corner, every forced smile from Linda's friends who looked at her as though she were part of the furniture. But Amelia's strength didn't waver. Instead, it built, growing in small, almost imperceptible waves that filled her with a quiet resolve. The longer she remained in that room, the more certain she became of one thing: she was done with this life. It wasn't long before the evening took a turn. As Amelia was setting down a tray of glasses on the dining table, she overheard Linda's voice drifting through the room, laced with mock concern. "You know," Linda was saying to one of her friends, her tone just loud enough for Amelia to hear, "it's not easy dealing with someone like her. Amelia's never been, how should I say, quite up to the family standards. But we've done our best to tolerate her." Amelia felt the sting of Linda's words settle like a stone in her chest, each syllable a reminder of how little respect Linda truly had for her. She glanced toward James, who was laughing along, nodding in agreement as though Linda's insults were simply truths to be accepted. She felt her cheeks flush, her fingers trembling as she gripped the tray. 1,000 comebacks ran through her mind, each one fiercer than the last, but she held her tongue, swallowing the anger that threatened to spill over. Then, as if on cue, Linda turned her sharp gaze toward Amelia, her mouth twisting into a cruel smile. "Amelia, dear," she called, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Could you do something right for once and bring us another bottle of wine?" The words hung in the air, loaded with disdain, a deliberate jab meant to remind Amelia of her place. Amelia felt something snap. Without thinking, she set the tray down harder than she intended, the glasses clinking against each other in a way that silenced the room. "No," she said, her voice low but steady. "Get it yourself, Linda." A shocked murmur swept through the room. Linda's mouth fell open, her eyes wide with disbelief. James stared at Amelia, his expression a mix of shock and anger, as though he couldn't believe she'd dared to defy his mother. "What did you say?" Linda asked, her voice cold and sharp. Amelia took a deep breath, steadying herself. "I said, get it yourself. I'm not here to be at your beck and call anymore." Linda's face twisted with rage, her voice rising. "How dare you speak to me like that? You ungrateful." But Amelia cut her off. "Ungrateful?" she repeated, her voice stronger, laced with a quiet anger. "I've spent years serving this family, doing everything I can to make you happy. And you've never once shown me an ounce of respect." James stepped forward, his face flushed with embarrassment and fury. "Amelia, you're out of line." But she didn't back down. "No, James, I'm not. Not anymore." For the first time, Amelia felt a sense of freedom wash over her, a weight lifting from her shoulders. She turned on her heel and walked out of the room, leaving behind the stunned faces and the whispers that followed her. Amelia left Linda's house without looking back, walking quickly down the street, as though every step could put more distance between herself and the life she was leaving behind. The cold evening air bit into her skin, but it only fueled her determination. She didn't know where she was going, but she knew one thing: she couldn't go back. She reached the corner and pulled out her phone, her fingers shaking as she dialed Samantha's number. "Amelia." Samantha's voice was warm and familiar, filled with concern. "Is everything all right?" "No," Amelia replied, her voice breaking. I finally left. I don't know where to go, Sam. Can you help me?" "Of course, Amelia. Stay where you are, I'll be right there." Amelia sank onto a nearby bench, wrapping her arms around herself as she waited. The weight of everything that had just happened hit her all at once, and she felt a tear slip down her cheek. She let it fall, no longer feeling the need to hide her pain. Minutes later, Samantha's car pulled up and Amelia climbed in, barely holding back her emotions. Samantha didn't press her with questions, simply reaching out to squeeze her hand as she drove them back to her place. Later that night, as Amelia lay on the couch in Samantha's living room, a quiet sense of relief washed over her. For the first time in years, she felt safe, free from the constant judgment, the harsh words, the invisible chains that had bound her. Samantha sat beside her, offering her a cup of tea. "You're safe here," she said gently. "Take all the time you need." Amelia nodded, grateful for Samantha's kindness, but she knew deep down that she couldn't stay here forever. She needed to figure out her next steps, to rebuild a life she'd hardly dared to imagine. The next morning, she awoke to the soft light filtering through the curtains, a quiet reminder that this was the beginning of something new. She took a deep breath, feeling a mix of fear and exhilaration, but with a newfound strength she hadn't known she possessed. Her phone buzzed, and she looked down to see James's name flashing on the screen. She hesitated, her heart pounding as she considered whether to answer. After a moment, she hit ignore, setting the phone down and turning away from the memories of her old life. She didn't need James's approval, his apologies, or his attempts to lure her back. She was done with that chapter. Samantha walked in, a knowing smile on her face. "You ready to take on the world?" Amelia looked at her friend, feeling the smallest hint of a smile tug at her lips. "I think I am." The morning after her escape, Amelia awoke in Samantha's guest room to a quiet house and the soft glow of early sunlight filtering through the window. For the first time in years, she felt a sense of calm. The past few days had been a whirlwind, yet here in Samantha's house, She felt shielded from the judgment and expectations that had governed her life with James and Linda. But as the relief settled over her, so did a new worry. What next? She had left everything behind, with no savings, no job, and little experience to stand on. Her mind raced with doubts, but she reminded herself of the truth she'd felt last night. She couldn't go back. Not to that house, not to that life. Samantha, sensing Amelia's worries, appeared at the door with coffee and a warm smile. "Good morning, sunshine," she greeted gently. "I hope you're ready to start fresh." Amelia managed a small smile, grateful for her friend's support. "I don't know where to begin, Sam. I don't even know if I can do this." Samantha handed her the coffee and sat beside her, her voice filled with encouragement. "You've already done the hardest part. You left. Now, it's just one step at a time, and I'll help you through it." Taking a sip of coffee, Amelia felt the warmth fill her, a spark of hope slowly growing in the quiet confidence of Samantha's words. That day, she and Samantha put together a plan. They listed local job options, budgeting for a modest apartment and considering a few places within her limited means. The tasks seemed overwhelming, but having Samantha at her side made it feel possible. After a few days of searching, Amelia found a position at a local laundry service. The work was simple but steady, and she welcomed the structure it brought to her days. She busied herself folding, sorting, and cleaning clothes for clients, finding a strange comfort in the rhythm of the work. Each day felt like a small victory, a step toward regaining control over her life. The first paycheck Amelia received was modest, but it was hers a reward she had earned on her own. That evening, she sat with Samantha, a feeling of pride filling her as she studied the small check in her hands. "It's not much," she said, smiling shyly, "but it feels like a start." Samantha beamed at her. "It's more than a start, Amelia. It's proof that you're stronger than you ever thought you were." Taking Samantha's words to heart, Amelia began looking for a place of her own. After a few days of searching, she found a tiny studio apartment. The walls were plain, the floors scuffed, and the furniture sparse. But to Amelia, it was perfect. It was hers. The first night in her new apartment felt strange, and Amelia found herself overwhelmed by the emptiness. The silence echoed through the small space, reminding her of all she had left behind. But as the days passed, she found solace in decorating the room, slowly turning it into a reflection of herself. One day, Samantha came by with a surprise. "I have a friend who's a handyman," she said. "He's willing to help you with some repairs if you're interested." Amelia hesitated, uncertain about accepting help from someone she didn't know. But when Samantha reassured her, she agreed, grateful for any assistance she could get. Ethan arrived the next morning, a tall, friendly man in his early 40s with an easygoing demeanor. He extended his hand with a warm smile. Amelia, Samantha told me you needed some help around here." Amelia nodded, feeling a bit nervous but comforted by his kindness. "Yes, thank you. I didn't realize how much this place needed until I moved in." Ethan glanced around, nodding as he examined the peeling paint and the loose floorboards. "It's got character, that's for sure," he said with a grin. "But don't worry, we'll get it looking great." Amelia felt a surge of gratitude as she watched Ethan work, his easy confidence putting her at ease. Over the next few days, he returned regularly, always with a friendly smile and respectful attitude. Amelia found herself looking forward to his visits, a small spark of happiness blossoming with each conversation they shared. During one of his visits, Ethan brought his son, Ben. The boy, a lively 10-year-old, explored the apartment with wide-eyed curiosity, bringing a burst of energy to the quiet space. Amelia smiled as Ben peppered her with questions about her new home and shared stories about his school projects and friends. "He's quite a character," she said to Ethan as Ben darted around the room. Ethan chuckled, a look of pride in his eyes. "Yeah, he keeps me on my toes. He's the reason I work so hard. I want to make sure he has a good life." Amelia listened, sensing the warmth and love in Ethan's voice as he spoke about his son. It was a kind of love she'd never felt from James, whose focus had always been on appearances and success rather than family. The realization struck her quietly. This was what she wanted: connection, kindness, respect. As Ethan continued his repairs, Amelia found herself sharing small details about her past, her words hesitant but sincere. She spoke of her mother's dedication to Linda's household, the years she had spent in that house, and the life she tried to build with James. Ethan listened quietly, his expression compassionate. "It sounds like you've been through a lot," he said softly. "But you made it out. That takes real strength." Amelia felt a rush of gratitude, his words sinking deep into her heart. She was unaccustomed to such kindness, to someone truly seeing her. For the first time, she felt the wall she had built around herself begin to crack, allowing a sliver of hope to shine through. The day Ethan finished the repairs, he handed her a business card. "If you ever need anything else, don't hesitate to call," he said, his voice warm. Amelia smiled, slipping the card into her pocket. "Thank you, Ethan. I mean it, you've helped me more than you know." As he left, she watched him go, feeling a new sense of possibility take root within her. The apartment felt more like home now, a space that was finally hers, and she owed part of that to Ethan's kindness. A few days later, Amelia received a message from Ethan. He invited her to a small community event at the local plaza, where families gathered to enjoy food, music, and laughter. Ethan mentioned that Ben would be there with friends, and she was more than welcome to join them. Amelia hesitated, her old fears surfacing. Social events had always been uncomfortable, often involving judgment and expectations she could never meet. But this invitation felt different. It wasn't about appearances or impressing anyone. It was simply an offer of friendship. After a moment of indecision, she replied with a simple, "I'd love to join." When she arrived at the plaza that evening, the festive atmosphere lifted her spirits immediately. Strings of colorful lights decorated the square, and the cheerful sound of children's laughter echoed through the air. She spotted Ethan and Ben near a food stand, both waving as she approached. "Amelia," Ben called, running over with a wide grin. "Come see. They have popcorn and hot dogs." She laughed, his enthusiasm infectious. "All right, lead the way." As they moved through the crowd, Amelia found herself relaxing, enjoying the simplicity of the evening. She and Ethan talked easily, sharing stories and laughing at Ben's antics as he ran back and forth, delighted by every new sight. Toward the end of the night, Ethan turned to her, his expression thoughtful. "Amelia, I'm glad you came. It's nice to see you smile." She felt a warmth spread through her at his words. "Thank you for inviting me. I didn't realize how much I miss things like this." Ethan nodded, a soft smile on his face. Sometimes, the simplest things are the ones that matter most. Amelia looked at him, feeling a growing connection that went beyond friendship. She knew they were both cautious, their lives marked by past struggles. But in that moment, she felt a sense of peace, a quiet happiness she hadn't known in years. Amelia felt as though her life had finally gained direction. Her days had settled into a routine at the laundry service, and her evenings were spent in her modest but cherished apartment. Ethan visited frequently, often bringing Ben along, and their conversations had started to shift from casual friendliness to something more meaningful. But even with this new stability, she couldn't shake the lingering memories of her past life, the things left unresolved. One evening, as she and Ethan sat on her small balcony watching the sunset, she found herself speaking without really planning to. "There's so much that I never really confronted," she murmured, almost to herself. Ethan turned to her, his gaze steady. "What do you mean?" Amelia took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. "Everything with James, Linda, they took so much from me and my mother. Sometimes I wonder if they should be held accountable for it." Ethan looked at her thoughtfully, understanding the depth of what she was saying. "It sounds like they never treated you as they should have. And from what you've told me, it doesn't seem like they treated your mother right, either." Amelia nodded slowly, feeling the weight of that truth settle over her. "My mother worked for Linda her whole life, with nothing to show for it. And I became just another part of their household, always doing their bidding without any real life of my own." Ethan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Amelia, you deserve to be free of them, fully and completely. If there's anything you can do to address what they put you through, it's worth considering." Amelia felt a surge of gratitude for his words. Just talking about it with someone who understood gave her a newfound sense of clarity. There's a part of me that's scared to even start, though, she admitted. What if it all just gets brushed aside? Ethan reached out, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. It won't be. I know an old friend who's a lawyer. His name's Aaron, and he's worked on cases like yours before. If you want, I can introduce you. Amelia nodded, feeling a mix of relief and apprehension. I think I'm ready. A few days later, Amelia and Ethan met with Aaron at his office. Aaron, a calm and thoughtful man in his 50s, greeted them warmly and listened attentively as Amelia told her story. She shared details she hadn't told anyone: how her mother had worked for Linda without pay, how she herself had been treated as little more than a servant in James's household, and how she'd been denied basic opportunities to learn and grow. When she finished, Aaron leaned back in his chair, visibly moved. Amelia, this is serious, he said, his voice filled with empathy. What Linda and James did to you and your mother goes beyond family obligations. They took advantage of your trust and labor for years without compensation, and that's exploitation. Amelia felt a pang in her chest as Aaron spoke, his words validating the experiences she had endured for so long. So, there's something I can do about it? Aaron nodded firmly. Absolutely. We can file a lawsuit against them, seeking compensation for the years of unpaid labor. It won't be easy, but you have a strong case. Ethan placed a supportive hand on her arm, his steady presence comforting her as she processed everything. It's your choice, Amelia, he said quietly. But whatever you decide, I'll be here to help. With a deep breath, Amelia nodded. I want to go through with it. Not just for me, but for my mother too. She deserved so much more than what she got. Aaron smiled, a look of respect in his eyes. I'll get the paperwork started. We'll bring them to justice. When James and Linda received notice of the lawsuit, they reacted with fury. Within days, Amelia's phone was flooded with messages from James, each one more frantic and accusatory than the last. He called her names, accusing her of betrayal, painting himself as the victim in a desperate attempt to manipulate her into dropping the case. Amelia, how could you do this to us? One of his texts read. After everything we did for you, you're going to destroy this family? But Amelia, strengthened by her new sense of self-worth and her friend's support, refused to respond. She deleted his messages, focusing instead on preparing for the upcoming legal battle with Aaron's help. As the court date approached, Ethan remained by her side, encouraging her to stay strong. You're standing up for yourself, Amelia. You deserve this. Finally, the day of the hearing arrived. Amelia entered the courtroom feeling a mixture of fear and determination. Aaron stood beside her, offering her a reassuring smile as they faced James and Linda across the aisle. The judge, a stern but fair-looking man, listened intently as Aaron presented the case. Aaron detailed the years of exploitation Amelia and her mother had endured, supported by evidence of unpaid labor, restrictive control over her life, and even Linda's recorded threats toward Amelia. As Aaron spoke, James and Linda's expressions shifted from anger to shock. Linda's composed demeanor faltered, and her jaw clenched as Aaron played a recording of her voice, cold and cruel. The words echoed through the courtroom. If you don't get back in line, Amelia, I'll make sure your mother's life at the nursing home becomes a living hell. A heavy silence fell over the room as the recording ended, and Amelia felt a mixture of vindication and sadness as she watched Linda's face crumble under the weight of her own words. Then it was James's turn to speak, and his desperation was palpable. He rose, his voice trembling as he pleaded, Your Honor, this is a misunderstanding. We've always treated Amelia like family. She knows that. But Amelia stayed firm, her gaze unwavering. She knew now that his words were empty, his pleas for forgiveness nothing more than an attempt to save face. The judge asked James and Linda directly, Did you ever pay Amelia's mother for her years of service? James stammered, struggling for an answer. Finally, Linda spoke up, her voice edged with bitterness. They didn't need money from us. We gave them a home, food, everything they needed. Aaron quickly countered, his voice firm. The Carters deprived Amelia and her mother of basic rights, effectively using them as unpaid labor. This was not a fair exchange. The judge's expression hardened as he looked at James and Linda. Exploitation is not generosity, he said, his voice carrying a weight of authority. The court finds in favor of the plaintiff, Amelia Carter. Mr. and Mrs. Carter, you are hereby ordered to compensate her for the years of unpaid labor, and you will be subject to further penalties for abusive practices. When the ruling was announced, Amelia felt a wave of relief wash over her. She had done it. After years of silence and suffering, she had finally spoken out and she had been heard. Ethan was waiting for her outside the courtroom, a proud smile on his face. You did it, Amelia. She hugged him, feeling the strength of his support bolster her even further. Thank you, Ethan. I don't know if I could have done this without you. Over the next few weeks, as the financial compensation from the court ruling was processed, Amelia allowed herself to dream of a future that was finally hers. She invested in her education, taking courses that would allow her to build a meaningful career, one where she could use her experiences to help others who face similar challenges. As Amelia worked toward her goals, her bond with Ethan grew stronger. They shared quiet dinners, long conversations, and moments of laughter with Ben, whose joy filled her home with a warmth she had longed for. Together, they built a life that was marked by kindness, respect, and mutual support, the very thing she had been denied for so long. One evening, as they sat together, Amelia looked at Ethan, feeling a depth of gratitude she could barely express. Thank you, Ethan, she said softly, for everything. You've given me a life I never thought I'd have. Ethan took her hand, his voice gentle. You found it for yourself, Amelia. I just helped you see it. Months passed after the court's decision, and Amelia's life blossomed in ways she had never imagined. The compensation awarded to her from the sale of James and Linda's assets allowed her to live comfortably while she continued her education. With newfound courage, she enrolled in community college, taking courses in psychology and social work. Each class was a step forward, a way to transform her past pain into something meaningful that could help others. Ethan was by her side, encouraging her every step of the way. They spent countless evenings together, often with Ben, sharing dinners, laughter, and moments of quiet happiness. For the first time, Amelia felt like she was building a family rooted in love, respect, and kindness, not control or obligation. One evening, as they sat on her porch watching the sun set over the neighborhood, Ethan turned to her, his expression thoughtful. Amelia, I've been meaning to ask, have you thought about taking this further? Making a career out of helping people? Amelia looked at him, her heart swelling with gratitude for his faith in her. I have, actually. I want to become a counselor, someone who can help people the way Aaron helped me. She paused, smiling shyly. I wouldn't have come this far without you, Ethan. Ethan reached out, taking her hand in his. You would have done it, Amelia. Maybe it just took someone to remind you of your strength. Their eyes met, and for a moment, words were unnecessary. Amelia felt a warmth in her heart that she had once believed was out of reach. She knew now that she had found something real and enduring with Ethan, a love that didn't demand or control, but lifted her up. Amelia continued to focus on her education, moving steadily toward her goal. But as much as she had tried to put the past behind her, a lingering question remained. What had become of James? She hadn't seen or heard from him since the trial, and she knew he was no longer a part of her life. Still, a small part of her felt that there was one last piece of her past she needed to close. One afternoon, she learned from an old acquaintance that James had taken a job as a janitor at a local diner on the other side of town. He had lost his house, his status, and nearly all the comforts he'd once taken for granted. It was a sharp contrast to the life he had known, but Amelia felt no sense of satisfaction in hearing about his downfall. Instead, she felt an unexpected desire to see him one last time, not for revenge, but for closure. Amelia decided to visit the diner. She walked in, her heart steady, her head held high. James was sweeping near the entrance, his eyes downcast, and she noticed how different he looked. Gone was the proud, self-assured man she had once known. In his place stood a man who looked worn, a shadow of the person he had been. When he saw her, he froze, the broom clattering to the ground. A flicker of hope crossed his face, mixed with desperation. He approached her slowly, a forced smile on his face. "Amelia," he said, his voice uncertain. I knew we'd see each other again. Maybe we can start over? I've changed, really." Amelia looked at him, feeling an overwhelming sense of peace that surprised her. She realized that she no longer felt the anger, the pain, or even the resentment that had once consumed her. Instead, she felt free from his hold, from the weight of his approval, and from the role he had once forced her to play. "No, James," she replied calmly, meeting his gaze without hesitation. "I didn't come here to reconcile. I came here to close this chapter. I've moved on, and I'm not looking back." The hope in James's eyes faded, replaced by bitterness. He sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. "You were nothing before me, Amelia. You owe everything you are to me." But his words had no power over her anymore. Amelia's expression remained steady, unmoved by his anger. "You're wrong, James. I became the woman I am in spite of you, not because of you. I owe you nothing." She turned and walked away, feeling a deep sense of closure wash over her. With every step, she felt lighter, as though she were leaving behind the last remnants of the life she had once endured. As she exited the diner and breathed in the crisp afternoon air, Amelia felt a profound sense of freedom. She had finally freed herself from the shadow of James and Linda, from the years of control and mistreatment. She had taken her life back, and now it was hers to live as she chose. In the weeks that followed, Amelia continued to focus on her education, her future becoming brighter with each day. Her relationship with Ethan deepened, and as they spent more time together, they began to speak of a shared life. Ben adored Amelia, and their small but loving family felt complete in a way that brought Amelia more happiness than she had ever known. One evening, Ethan took her hand, his gaze warm and steady. "Amelia, I know life has been hard for you, but I'd be honored to build a life with you, a life of love, respect, and joy." Amelia felt tears prick at her eyes, overwhelmed by his sincerity. She nodded, a smile spreading across her face. "I'd love that too, Ethan. I never thought I'd have this a chance at real happiness." They were married in a small, intimate ceremony, surrounded by close friends and family, people who had supported Amelia through her journey. The simple gathering was filled with love and laughter, a stark contrast to the empty gatherings she had once known. 10 years passed, and Amelia's life had transformed beyond her wildest dreams. She became a licensed counselor, using her experiences to help others who had been through similar struggles. She approached each client with empathy and compassion, finding purpose in helping others find their own strength and resilience. Amelia and Ethan's home were filled with laughter, especially from their twin boys, now 3 years old. Ben, Ethan's son from his previous relationship, had grown into a thoughtful young man who adored his younger siblings and treated Amelia like a mother. The family shared a closeness that filled Amelia's heart with gratitude every day. One evening, as she and Ethan sat on the porch watching their children play in the yard, Amelia reflected on how far she had come. She looked at Ethan, a feeling of contentment settling over her. "I don't even know how to thank you, Ethan," she said softly. "You've given me everything I could have ever wanted." Ethan squeezed her hand gently. "You don't have to thank me, Amelia. You were strong all along. I was just lucky enough to be a part of your journey." They shared a quiet smile, watching the sunset together. In that moment, Amelia knew, without a doubt, that she had found the life she had always dreamed of, a life filled with love, joy, and the freedom she had fought so hard to achieve. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, she felt a profound sense of peace settle over her. For the first time in her life, she was truly, completely free. As Amelia's journey to freedom and happiness comes to a close, we hope her story has inspired you as much as it has us. If you enjoyed today's story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more heartfelt, uplifting tales. Give this video a like, share it with friends who need a little encouragement, and leave a comment below to let us know your thoughts. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next story.